All right, before all that, let's get to Pennsylvania, where a friend of the show, Ryan Jones, joins us from the newly flipped blue state. Ryan, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Ger. Great to see you. How are you?
It's been a blue day all over the big maps that we're watching here on CNN, and you're literally, I think, right at the heart of it. People who are watching are looking at the great state of Pennsylvania, and the bottom right-hand corner in the Philadelphia metropolitan area, there's a load of blue, and it kind of streaks up a little bit. And then there's the Allegheny County, where we're still waiting for those votes to be counted for who knows why or what reason. Let's wait and see what happens there. That's where Pittsburgh is. And in the middle, there's Centre County, which I had to Google today to see where the hell State College was, and it's blue as well, surrounded by a sea of red.
We're the lonely blue, I was going to say dot, but we're more of a sort of, someone said it, we look like a funny old hat or something, the shape of the county here. But yeah, it's a big university town, as you know, and so I think that has a lot to do with it, but otherwise it's very rural and very not diverse in all the sort of surrounding counties for an hour or so in any direction. So yeah, we're happy to be on the right side of this one, in my opinion, definitely.
And how far would you be from Philadelphia and from Pittsburgh?
With some luck on the roads, probably about 2.5 hours to Pittsburgh and about 3 or so to Philadelphia.
Okay, so it's kind of an oasis in the middle of this. What's it actually been like watching this unfold? When you went to bed and woke up and saw the first figures, what was your immediate reaction? Or did you know the way the mailing ballots were going to work?
Yeah, I was optimistic. I tried to sit it out on Tuesday night because there were so many predictions that it was going to take a while that I didn't want to ruin my night that way. And but I've had a harder time certainly last night and today because I think we've all started to get impatient. I follow enough smart people on Twitter who study polls or involved in polling in some cases, and it seemed like all signs were pointing to the mail-in ballots were going to be really strong for Biden. And based on the early returns, even though Trump quote unquote led, he didn't lead. His votes were counted earlier because they were more likely to be done in person. So I was optimistic based on that. I've been reluctant to get too confident, I think, certainly after 4 years ago, but I think there was increasing optimism that the math really lined up well in Pennsylvania, as it has in a number of other states.
Because it was a lead of about 600,000, and there was that long period where we didn't really know exactly. It's certainly us in this part of the world, we're kind of looking at going, that's quite a big lead, and right. we don't actually know how many postal votes there are going to be, and that information kind of came in dribs and drabs, and suddenly it was actually, there are loads, and they're going 80-20 in favour of Biden as opposed to Trump, and there might just be enough. And then it was like, it's still very long. And at that point, everything else had unfolded to the moment where we realised that if Pennsylvania goes for Biden, that's it. There is literally no way that Trump can win. What's that been like living through?
It's been anxious, I think, as for so many people, and obviously not just in the country, but in the world. We're talking right now, right? I mean, we know here that this, impacts us well beyond our borders. So it's been an anxious time. I could talk for hours probably, Ger, about my family relationships that have been impacted this, and people I know, friendships, neighbors. It's added a lot of attention to a lot of folks' lives and relationships that have really kind of come to a head recently. Again, I'm pretty fortunate to live in an area that's fairly liberal, relatively progressive, so I feel I felt more comfortable here. But I know people who are in areas where they don't have that sort of support, and there's tension, and there's been tension across the country, and there probably still will be for a while. But to see the way it's gone the past couple of days, and again to have some sense that the smart people who know how this stuff works were saying, it's going the right direction. You just got to be patient. That's been encouraging. But again, having to keep sort of remind yourself, you don't want to assume, you don't want to call it before it's official, because that disappointment would just make it that much worse. So hopefully we've avoided that, and this doesn't solve all our problems as a country by any stretch, but it'll be a nice step.
Yeah, I think it's always a really bad idea to massively overreact to anything that happens in an election. You kind of have to see what the forces behind it were, and drill down into individual parts of the country and how they voted and the demographics and all that kind of stuff. But certainly a record number of people voted because a bunch of new people came into the electorate, despite the fact that there was a lot of suppression of votes going on. That must be something that I think would give you some hope as an American citizen, that perhaps at least new voices are being heard and more people are being enervated and energized to exercise their franchise.
I think so. And the hope is that it's not just because some of it clearly is because this personality of the guy who we're hopefully getting out of there was so grating for so many people, even conservatives. I mean, I have conservative family members who voted Republican their entire lives who couldn't support this guy. And so I think that the hope is that it's not just about people saying, oh, we can't stand this guy, but once he's gone, we can go back to not really caring. The hope is that maybe people will start paying more attention to policy issues a little more closely and realize, the decisions that are made that really impact people's lives and well-being. As a liberal, progressive-leaning person, I hope the Democratic Party gets its act together a bit more and emphasizes policy that really helps working people and poor people. And they've not been very good at that. I don't know if Biden is the guy who will change that actively, but I think there is a great encouraging young, diverse, progressive movement in this country that's got me optimistic. So, I hope that the turnout was necessary. We knew that this time, the higher turnout, but there's still a lot more that can be done on that front. Again, particularly for younger voters, for more diverse voters, to get people really engaged and understand that they've got the ability to not just change a candidate, but change policy and really try to get policies through in a way that can help most people.
One of the real reasons I wanted to chat to you today was because seeing Erie County flick, and I'd seen on your Twitter feed somebody making the point, win Erie County, win the state, win the presidency, and it's not a million miles away from the truth. This one kind of part of this one huge state is actually quite an important bellwether. Last time Trump won it, the previous time before that Obama had won it. I'm sure there are some other places around the country that are like that, but when you're saying that if you get people energized, it can actually literally change the future. It's in a weird way, the entire country does come down to a few different parts, a few little pockets where one activist convinces 50 people to go and convince their friends to go and vote, and suddenly it literally changes the race for president.
Yeah, and some of that, as I'm sure the rest of the world has seen and really absorbed recently, is down to our sort of embarrassing system of the Electoral College and the way that, again, as Clinton won by a couple million votes or whatever it was in 2016, but still lost the election. I think the Democrats now have won every popular vote but one over the past, I think, 8 elections. I think Bush is second. The fact that it comes down to these certain sort of counties that could kind of go either way based on whatever whims a relatively small number of people choose to vote on is not great. But it does speak to, like you said, the hopefully the power and potential there of people who take the time to get out and organize and canvass and knock on doors. I did a very little bit, mailed out postcards and did a little bit of phone banking, and I didn't flip the state, but every little bit helps, and so I think understanding that is really important. I think the Democrats are at least getting better than that. But again, even the organizations I worked with were sort of independent, progressive organizations. So the Democrats as a party need to get better at figuring out how to really mobilize and capitalize. And again, they need candidates and policies that replace that. It remains incredibly embarrassing that we don't have health care for all our citizens in this country, and that's something that Joe Biden's not going to solve. There's still a lot of areas where the left in this country, at least as far as it's represented by the Democrats, can do so much more and so much better. So I guess that the encouraging side of that is that there's a lot of room still to get better, but it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, that's very clear. I did want to talk to you about the intersection of sport and race and politics over the last couple of months, and since lockdown and since the suspension of sport. It's hard. Again, I don't want to draw any idiotic conclusions today. We're still in the midst of this thing and you don't have any data or any information about it, but Georgia flips, and that's really interesting because there's a huge black population there, and it seems to have voted in, the turnout in black areas seems to be much higher than it has been in previous generations as well. And I do wonder how important the activism of the athletes has been in just getting out a smaller number, which is the kind of 1 or 2% that might swing this in certain areas. Again, you think small counties, they flip and all of a sudden momentum. And I can't help but think that the way that the young sports people have become activists over the last 6 months hasn't had some kind of impact.
I think so. And I think, again, in places like Atlanta and places like Milwaukee and places like Philadelphia, I think, again, it's impossible to measure right now. Maybe it's impossible to measure ever. And certainly the conservative argument to that has been, this is alienating. People just want their sports, and they don't want to be they don't want to be distracted by this. They don't want it to be politicized. Of course, they only say that if you disagree with them. The handful of conservative athletes or celebrities or whatever, they're happy to hear their opinions. But I think you have to assume that it's probable that has, whether it's influenced people to vote or made it easier for people to vote. Of course, I bring it back to LeBron, Jackie, because that's what I do. But his initiative, which was a tangible initiative to raise voting access and awareness. A number of other athletes. The Atlanta Hawks head coach, whose name I'm just embarrassingly blanking on right now, but he was really active in some, on the ground, get out the vote efforts in Atlanta. A number of other athletes across the country, particularly in the NBA. And even the sort of insistence, and this will be debated forever, but when the players, it looked like were going to strike, or where they did temporarily strike, and maybe they were going to leave the NBA bubble a couple of months back, and then they decided to stay. And some people saw that as, they didn't do as much as they could, but and whether or not the concessions they got were enough. Well, one of the concessions, for lack of a better word there, was nearly every NBA owner agreeing to open up their arenas as voting centers. And in big, predominantly Black, very diverse cities, in places like Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Atlanta, how much of a difference did that end up making? I don't know if we can say for sure, but I have to think it helped. And it was undeniably the right thing to do. And hopefully it leads to sort of continued activism for a lot of these athletes, particularly the younger ones. Their influence is really strong, and increasingly those guys, again, LeBron's been at the forefront of that, but so many other athletes as well, are really educating themselves on the tangible issues and the tangible actions, not just, go vote. They're really figuring out, hey, here's what we can do to make it easier for people to vote, and to educate them about what they should be voting on. And I'm hopeful about all that, and it's been great as an NBA fan to see that league and those men and women. The WNBA was phenomenal about that. To see them take the lead on that.
Was it Lloyd Pierce? That's the
Lloyd Pierce, yes, thank you. Yeah, he was on the ground there. He was doing incredible work.
The thing that strikes me about that, and I know you're a big soccer fan, so my concern with the Premier League, with the way that everything is now, it's essentially as striking as the pre-match handshake used to be. It's like, oh, they're all shaking hands, and then you kind of get used to it. Now they all kneel for a minute before, and it's like, something else needs to happen here, otherwise this just becomes token. That's not the case with the activism that we're seeing from the athletes in the NBA, and that genie is out of the bottle. That's never going to go back. You're never going to have a depoliticized NBA. You're never going to have players who feel somehow that they can't speak about this in the way that the NFL is still quite clearly, players are still getting blackballed for speaking out. So that's been a transformative moment, I think, over the last couple of years. And I don't know, is LeBron following in somebody's footpath, or is he the trailblazer in that?
I don't want to give him too much credit, because certainly he's following the examples of, Muhammad Ali and Bill Russell, and he's been really good about citing, those giants through the civil rights movement here of the 60s. And so in that sense, I mean, he's got more money, and in a way he's got less to lose. He's never got a chance, the potential of losing his livelihood, like Ali did, losing some of the prime years of his professional playing career, like Ali did. So in that sense, he had less to lose. He's got, he's nearly a billionaire or whatever. He can afford to take these risks. But at the same time, he's also, in a way, you could argue, got more reasons not to bother, right? Because he can be more insulated given his money. He can afford, as many other players probably historically have over the past couple of decades, said, you know what, this isn't my fight, this isn't my problem. Again, with LeBron in particular, whose story I know pretty well, to come from what he came from, a single mother, no father, very poor in a place in Akron, Ohio that was really run down, a large Black population and not a lot of wealth or resources, to see what he's become as a player, but much more so as a man and a leader on this stuff is incredible to me, and it's been so amazing and cool to watch. So again, he's following, and he'd be the first to say it, he follows some really giant steps as far as others who've led on this issue. But I think for this generation, what he's doing now is putting his money and his influence toward, again, large-scale tangible solutions. The school that he helped fund in the city of Akron that I visited, and it's a phenomenal place, just incredibly inspiring. He's doing stuff that I think, in that sense, maybe he is a trailblazer, because I think he's doing things that no one else has done, even though he's certainly not the first to go down this path.
But then it challenges everybody in his generation to do something similar, or to be as relevant, or to, like, so you see Marcus Rashford, for example. Marcus Rashford's confidence to come out and take on the British government is absolutely amazing, and the rest of football is kind of looking around going, "Oh, what? No, you're not supposed to do this, Marcus, because you're making us look bad."
Right. Yeah, he's been incredible, and again, that's the hope, is that it does rub off and inspire other guys. When I did for Slam a couple of years ago a story on LeBron's school opening in Akron, Jarvis Landry, the NFL wide receiver who played for the Cleveland Browns, was there, and he was sort of getting a tour of the place the day that I was out there. And he had this kind of wide-eyed look about him, like he couldn't believe that another relatively young black man had this influence, that he'd been able, like, through his wealth and his influence, been able to create a school that serves hundreds of children, just based on being a great basketball player and then turning that into something else. So to see another, very successful American professional athlete, only a few years younger than LeBron, say, this is incredible and this is the kind of impact I want to have. Yeah, it's hard to say, impossible to say how many young, particularly black men and not just black men. Again, the WNBA, I don't want to ever overlook. Those women have been remarkable as well in all this. But the influence that kind of example can have on these other athletes coming up. And, Kevin Durant and Steph Curry, guys who were mostly in LeBron's shadow, but they've got initiatives. There are a number of these guys who are really seeing the potential they have to use their wealth and their fame to make change. And that's incredible. That's what we need more of, certainly, in this country right now.
And they're actively engaged, and they're tweeting today, and they've been tweeting all week about it as well. So you can see that they're active participants in what's happening, as opposed to protecting their brand and staying quiet and getting somebody to compose a tweet for them and an Insta post at the end of this, whenever it comes out. And they're not Jack Nicklaus and Brett Favre, so there's always that as well. Last question. This is obviously going to finish, we think, in hopefully relatively straightforward terms, particularly if the numbers get to where they look like they're going at the moment. And I'm sure there'll be an attempted coup, however that happens. But let's assume that there's a new president. In that atmosphere, it's going to be very interesting to see what role that the sports teams and the players take. And I don't know what the future holds, but do you feel a bit more hopeful about it now than, say, this time last week?
The short term, certainly. And then the long term, I've had one thing as a white media member who, has obviously talked to a lot of black athletes in my life and career. I've listened to enough really active current and former athletes who are genuinely activists and have been involved in this kind of work for a long time. I've asked them the optimism question, and they sort of go, no, not optimistic. I'm hopeful, the sense that, it's encouraging and we're moving in the right direction, but rhetoric doesn't ultimately change anything. It's not going to change. Joe Biden getting elected is not going to change the fact that our policing in this country is still really skewed against people of color, and the entire criminal justice system is, and more broadly, healthcare. You can sort of go across the board. So in the short term, yeah, I'm feeling better about things. Obviously, I think many of us are. Long term, there's still a lot of tangible work that needs to be done. And one election, certainly this one in particular, where the Republicans will probably still keep Congress, is not going to change much of that. So it's good to get this guy out, assuming we finish the job. But yeah, no, there's still just a lot of work to be done. I think the point is, it does speak to, there have been enough examples of, hey, here, good things can happen when people work hard, when people volunteer, spend the time, educate themselves on the issues, and so hopefully some of that is coming up now, and hopefully the people who have seen that will take it even further. Yeah,
well, look, we're all agog anyway, and that little blue patch in the middle of the red, that's where you are right now. Thanks a million for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Ryan Jones, always great to talk to you. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with Noel O'Leary in conversation with Kieran Donaghy and Joe Malloy, talking about the great Kerry-Cork rivalry, when there was a rivalry that was meaningful to speak about. Stay tuned.